Hi guys, thank you very much for attending this panel, aiming to discuss the changes that COVID-19 brought upon the venture and VC ecosystem, and what happened to the startups and what the seed investors are looking to do with those new wave of startups. I'm joined on the panel by Sarah Nokel from North Zone and Carmen Rico from the fund, as well as Hampus Jacobson, who I hope will join us online in a second, from Pale Blue Dot. Ah, sorry, Hampus. Okay, I couldn't see you. You are in the very end.
I'm hiding over here.
Great. So let's jump right into it with maybe a round of introductions. So Sarah, maybe you could get us started off.
Yeah, I'm currently at North Zone. We're a global venture capital firm investing across seed up until IPO. I'm specifically responsible for our early stage seed investments and focus a lot on B2B enterprise software, developer tooling, but occasionally also end up investing in new consumer companies.
Perfect, thank you. Carmen?
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Carmen. I was a partner at Blossom Capital doing Series A investments up until a few weeks ago. And now I'm focusing on angel investing. So I like to say I'm like a VC turned angel, working on something new that still needs to be a bit stealth. But in the meantime, I'm also a co-founder of the fund.vc, which is a community of founders and operators that invests into pre-seed companies. And we've done 20 investments in the last 12 months across Europe in pre-seed. So quite excited to discuss how the next 12 months are going to look like.
Thank you very much. And Hampus?
Yeah, so I'm general partner at Pale Blue Dot, and we're a pre-seed and seed fund looking only at climate tech.
Perfect, thank you. Great, so let's jump right into it with the first question for Carmen. We saw from our fund of funds activities in Axon that in the beginning of the pandemic, for 6 months, there was a very significant slowdown in the deal activity. And then kind of the next 6 months to 12 months, kind of everything accelerated. And everybody was saying, okay, I mean, this is the catching up, from what we've missed. And then everything is kind of going to slow down and go back to normal eventually. But it doesn't seem like it has. It just continues accelerating and accelerating. Maybe you could share your view on this, why this is happening, what's happening, and where all this is going.
Sure. I think it's very interesting that when COVID first hit, we actually organized this thing called the EU COVID call, and it was around 40, 50 GPs of funds across Europe. And the main concern was like, are we going to be able to get comfortable to build conviction when just meeting the companies over Zoom, right? And that was like a huge question a few, 18 months ago. And I think that period of holding back and reassessing was a couple of months, and then obviously picked up a lot the deal flow. I think a lot of things have happened, and Sarah jump in. But basically, COVID actually leveled the playing field when it came down to where the investors could come from. So we call it the Americans sort of arrived, and that meant there was a lot of capital. And I think also there was actually a lot of dry powder. Even though we didn't know if we were going to be able to build conviction, funds were raised and there was so much money to be deployed. So that was more like COVID-specific impact. And then something else that had been, I think, cooking for many years and that suddenly sort of blossomed also around last summer 2020, is that we are starting to see a lot of talent from tech scale-ups coming and launching their own startups. I think there's never been such volume of high-quality opportunities in Europe, and I've been investing in seed for the last 6 years. This I've never seen in the past year. That coupled with a lot of growth capital, which before wasn't there to ensure large outcomes, and it sort of retrofits the circle. It's non-stop, and to your point, I remember last summer discussing with colleagues, being it will come down because this August is crazy. Then up until December, it was mental, and it only builds up, right? But that's, I think, what makes the time in Europe super, super exciting now, both from pre-seed to all the way to the actual unicorns rate and stuff.
Well, I definitely couldn't agree with you anymore. I mean, now what's happening now, even looking on the, let's say, macro level, everything is just booming and booming and booming, and the quality of entrepreneurs is increasing. But what I wanted to say as well is that, I mean, the way the deals are done, I think, changed quite a bit as well. In the first 6 months as well, like people were, Zoom, can you really close the deal over Zoom? I remember everybody was putting on LinkedIn all the time, we just closed our first deal without ever meeting an entrepreneur. And now it has kind of become normal. So I know, Sarah, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how this is changing, and especially in what is the experience of North Zone, let's say, with this transition?
Yeah, no, I feel like it is definitely the new normal, and what was maybe quite foreign for us for some time has quickly become like standard in the industry, but also going back to more face-to-face meetings and interactions, especially in our job. And I think founders really appreciate that. Early stage investors really appreciate that building actually meaningful relationships, meeting people face-to-face, it's still something you can't really beat with only virtual interaction. So I feel like a lot of like different local networks, early stage investors or angels that are local, are still super dominant. And there is a lot of growth capital, and it's been easier for anyone just to speak to more funds, and it's been very efficient to raise a round of capital, so you don't have to go around and go for meetings anymore, which also creates a lot of competition. But the same for us, right? From an investor perspective, we can just meet a lot more entrepreneurs and be very picky, but also make sure where we spend most of our time on. And I feel like there's still very much of a social component. We have, even during the pandemic, we have literally traveled to any kind of within Europe at least. We have traveled before we wanted to close a deal and tried to make it happen. I ended up quarantining 2 weeks after I went to France last October because I really wanted to meet a founder. I felt like, there are still people, if you can actually make it possible, founders really value it, and VCs definitely will travel if they can for the final meetings. So that's something what we've seen. I think it's there's going to be this hybrid setup.
Okay, and Hampus, maybe you could tell us a little bit, because you're investing globally, right? Plus, I saw you were.
Yeah, exactly. I would say this is my life. It's I don't travel. I think that we've been investing 15 companies now for 17 months, so almost one a month. And we have met 3 of them in person. So I think that we just essentially, but as your comment previous were, that we were just started just in the beginning of the pandemic. So we kind of had to jump into the new world and just build ourselves completely remotely and really think about these things. And think about, I think one of the trickiest things is that when you meet people first time live, you have to sometimes recalibrate a bit about social skills and things that you might have missed a bit, small details. But I think that's one of the things that we've been training quite a lot on, trying to figure out how to do that and finding local references. And I think that's an interesting thing, that there are quite a lot of these DD networks created now, like the expert networks. You can pull in experts for biology or whatever. It almost feels like we need a DD network for social skills soon, when you just want to list who does this person actually know, and you can figure out, because LinkedIn is very kind of, people prune their LinkedIn profiles, right? So it would be nice to have an expert network and figure out everybody this person went to university with.
I would actually agree on that and say, because I was having a chat with some founders that I met for the first time last week, and I invested in them a year ago. And actually my advice to them was try to do face-to-face, but just because they were so much better. So I was like, that's a part of your strength. Play it in a way that you force the face-to-face meetings. So I think it's also in the new world where if you're really good at Zoom and you want to be very efficient, or if you're really good in interpersonal skills and you're going to charm people, just also play it accordingly and try to do one way or another, whatever works best.
Yeah, I want to continue.
I think as a comment to that, I just want to comment on that, because I think it's been really good for us, because all 3 GPs here are very easily affected by people's social skills. So we kind of tend to fall in love with founders, and it's really good for us to not get that last 20% charm of these amazing people, but to be able to kind of turn off the Zoom call, cool down, and think about it logically. Because I think that for us, it's been really good to not meet people in person, actually.
Fair point.
I actually want to follow up on that with, from what I see is that it seems to me at least that now that the pandemic is kind of coming to an end, many people that don't really want to go back to the office, and they're really looking proactively into starting startups. At least that's my opinion. I know everybody I seem to have graduated with started startups this year and continuing. Hampus, maybe you could give us a little bit of perspective of what changed as an entrepreneur yourself. Maybe you could tell us a little bit of what changed in kind of entrepreneurs themselves throughout COVID, and why is there such a boom as well, Carmen mentioned.
No, but I think as you said, Carmen, as well, I think the thing is that a lot of really strong talent has left the Googles and Facebooks and Ubers the last 12 months. I think that, I mean, looking at Facebook, I think Facebook will shed a lot of good people the coming weeks now. And these people, they have been working remotely for a year. They're very, very experienced people. They might recruit some of their old Facebook friends who are one in Netherlands, one in Amsterdam, like one in London, and they don't want to build an office. So I think it's kind of becomes this new normal. So I think that my main feeling is that I think teams have to choose. They have to either build an office team or build a remote team. And I think that the hybrid teams are really complicated. And we've really felt that issue when we meet teams and they have a couple of people that are very tight in the team, but they're actually physically spread out. How they actually managed that under the pandemic was really tricky. Because then they got a lot of these like small misconceptions. It's different, I think, if you have the sales team remote or all the dev team remote or something. But the problem is like when you have the too many roles that should be closed remote. So I think that's one of the things that we have been discussing quite a lot in our portfolio, how to help the founders with recruitment and realizing they have to like figure out how to do the remote. So I think that for me, I think that we're going to see a massive boom of these remote first companies.
And do you have any preference in terms of companies having an office team or working remotely? Or is that kind of become absolutely normal now?
No, I think for me, it's like certain products are really tricky to build remotely. And I think certain teams actually probably doesn't matter. So I think it's like when the design team and the dev team, for example, need to be really, really close and spar ideas really early stage. I have had a hard time seeing that happening within the remote, because then they're just small misconception. Even if people use all the smart online tools and every single like remote presence, they need that kind of, do you hate the design or do you just have a small comment thing that is usually missed on Slack? So I think that those stages, I've really recommended people to kind of fly in and be together or work together. But when a company is up and running and scaling, it kind of becomes as we all used to do in the back old days when we had country managers. Like you just have to figure out ways of measuring and helping people on with numbers and calls and not in presence.
Great, thank you. And during the pandemic as well, a couple of verticals really struggled, and then some new ones also emerged during the pandemic. I mean, one example of that is obviously Hopin that we discussed before, kind of an opportunity that probably didn't exist if it wasn't for COVID. Maybe you guys can share your thoughts a little bit about the verticals that were the big winners, verticals that were big losers, and then verticals maybe coming back.
I'll make a comment on Hopin though, and because I had the privilege of putting together 100% of that pre-seed. Every investor in that cap table was my intern, and Sarah and the team invested in the follow-on round. When those both rounds happened, the pre-seed and the seed, COVID wasn't even a word. Mm-hmm. Like that was November 2019 for the seed, and actually Hopin became a super, super competitive deal. And it was actually, funny enough, and around a thesis that not to do with COVID, but that is relevant today, which is interests today are global and they're not local. And so communities become global. And so if you have an online community, how do you engage your community farther than just what the writing medium or like written or image like an Instagram allows you? And so Hopin, like the crazy customer love and engagement on early days came because people with like somebody who liked to bake cakes in Australia and had 30,000 followers suddenly could organize an event in like 5 minutes and engage and monetize their audience in a product that was built online first. It wasn't trying to take an offline event into online, but online first. And then obviously COVID came and made the TAM worldwide. But it is true that like there were still very interesting sort of macro dynamics and strong why now around live streaming and how engaging it is that were there before COVID.
Okay. Any thoughts, Sarah?
No.
Okay, and maybe on any verticals that didn't do so well, but you kind of expect to start coming back a little bit?
I mean, travel is obvious, right? Yeah. But I think what's interesting is we're seeing really the emergence of more luxury travel propositions now. People are really craving unique experiences, highly curated experiences. And they're willing to spend a lot more on travel as well, those that can afford it. And yeah, we've seen a couple of interesting companies and do really, really well. Okay. But to your point, there are obviously a lot of other areas that have done really well besides just online events platforms. Looking into our portfolio, definitely B2B mental health. I think we don't have to probably explain it for a lot of different reasons. I personally spend a lot of time looking into more complex and sexy data companies. But one thing that really the COVID accelerated was really the cloud adoption. So a lot of enterprises are all of a sudden moved to SaaS models, have adopted the likes of the Redshifts and Snowflakes within the organization, and are processing huge amounts of data, have hired a bunch of data folks internally, and then need new tools to really stay competitive and understand their customers internally better, and store that data, build a single source of truth of the data. So there's been a huge amount of new data tools popping up in the US, but also in Europe. Which really, from coming out from like really strong technology companies, to the point earlier, a lot of former operators that experienced the problem themselves, and that's definitely been a good space, but leaving room for Hampus as well to chime in.
I think 2 comments, and then of course our focus. But I think that I'm not surprised, of course, that, as you said, Sarah, that travel has changed. And I think travel, one of the things I saw as well, a lot of travel companies changed to being long-term stay. So how do you kind of stay in a month in a place instead of being there for a week? And I think that whole sector, I think all of the travel companies that adapted, they went really successful. But the ones who were like hopping on places, they died. But I think on the other one, I'm really surprised about is that education has not really changed. Because I think what the headache now is, like, I really feel the world is moving so much faster, as we've said. I think that a lot of companies are digitized, a lot of new innovations coming, the world is getting flatter, we're doing investments and sourcing, and everything is happening more globally. But the thing is really frustrating that students are still kind of looking the same. So credential is still looking the same. And I think that's one going to be the bottleneck I think we're going to see the coming 5 years, is that universities are still churning out students the same way, and all the credentials doing the same way. And the problem is, like, now all startups are hiring and all the big companies are hiring into doing their digital transition. So there's going to be a crazy bottleneck of talent now. And I mean, it's always a crazy bottleneck of good tech talent, but I think now it's going to be absurd. And I think that on the sector where we focus, of course, is climate, whereas I think that was not so much to do with pandemic. It was essentially that climate has been a thing which the focus has just increased every year. So I think that's as it is. And I think hopefully increasing even more.
One interesting sector that had a lot of challenges during COVID and that is having challenges now for other reasons is actually all the on-demand platforms. When you think about all the way from Uber, but like all the beauty on-demand platforms, obviously they're super reliant on the supply, because without like drivers, without riders, without like therapists or beauticians, they cannot provide a service. And what's happening is, like, initially they were very restricted, obviously here in Spain as well, but in London, for example, like you could not have people coming to your home. So there were a lot of restrictions that really shut down and took to zero most of the revenues. And now the issue they have is that a lot of the people who used to work for them have left. So in London right now, actually, it's super difficult to get an Uber, but very, very difficult to get an Uber. Very difficult to find like staff for the supply side. And what's interesting, that is giving rise to, also because it's coupled with a lot of concerns around the gig economy and like what they call the new slavery economy, is new platforms that try to become like a trade union 2.0. So like a trade union for the whole on-demand economy, but commercially minded. And we're seeing some of like these employees from former tech scale-ups doing models like that. And that's actually quite an interesting twist to what the pandemic hit.
I think it's also kind of happening now because of regulation, because I don't know if you know what's happening in Spain. Yeah. They changed the regulation with the Ubers, and I mean, it's kind of happening, I mean, in a forced way here, but this makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so now coming to, let's say, the main point is what are you going to be, what are you looking at, what is exciting you about the next 12 months in terms of companies, sectors, where you're looking? Sarah, maybe you can get us started.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening. We're excited about a lot of things, not just from sector perspective, but I feel like you can never really plan ahead super well. The market is changing almost every quarter probably, or on a weekly basis. Focus is, I feel like, is really important right now, and knowing what you like and which founders you want to back as well. And there are obviously a few spaces where I feel like, we, especially at Northzone, have spent a lot of time in the last months or even over years, and have now seen I feel like, for example, consumer credit is one of the areas. We've seen Klarna and Zopa in our portfolio really experiment with consumer credit cards. And if you look into consumer credit as a financial product, it's literally or lending is the oldest product that's actually been around prior to the existence of internet or even electricity. Probably, people have always given been part of lending somehow, and we're seeing new models pop up. The way credit scoring is being done, the way their products are helpful for the underbanked people as well, the way paybacks is taking place or happening, and rewards as well. So that's definitely an area we're spending some more time on. And then there has been a huge emergence. I mean, we have been on the consumer side very active in gaming as well, or have been investing in crypto for a very long time. More on the infrastructure side historically, moving more to the front end and more mainstream applications now. I feel like that's another topic probably to come to later, but definitely an area where we're actively looking into. I personally spend a lot of my time in creator tooling. Not just only because of COVID, but we just reached a certain maturity point where there is a need for a lot of business tooling to really empower more people to become better entrepreneurs and run their business online. And you see a lot of people just venturing out and making millions of dollars just by having their own business, stitching together different tooling for accounting or for their marketing and running the business in general, and they just don't really speak to each other. So I think there's a huge opportunity for more verticalized businesses really targeted towards more of the solo entrepreneurs. That's another area I personally spend a lot of time in, but I'll hand it over to Carmen as well.
I'll say something is, for the first time in my life, I feel that it's like I'm at the right place at the right time. Like Europe is booming, and I don't know. I've always had this experience. We were we were not old enough when there was the web. We were late to mobile, and suddenly there's this is the time for Europe. And so to Sarah's point on focus, it is the time of year, but that comes with a lot of dysfunctionalities as well in deal making and valuation. So it is very important to keep focus, and it's very important to be able to also understand when is your conviction, when are you willing to play the competitive game and to pay up because you have crazy conviction? When is it FOMO, right? And for that, it is useful to sort of have some framework and build some thesis meeting a deal that might get very, very competitive very soon. And I think I tend to think about it as why now and why Europe? I think I have been, what sectors is Europe the best place to actually build business, right? When you think about comparing it to the US or Asia, I think construction tech is a very interesting one, where there's it's very unsexy, but there's so much productivity to be improved, and Germany, Spain, actually, they're countries that should be at the forefront of anything related to construction tech. Climate tech, and I will obviously let Hampus talk about that, but all the way from carbon offsetting and how controversial that might be to other much more interesting models, right? Thinking about why Europe is something that and then in terms of why now, I've also spent quite a bit of time looking at DevOps and dev tools, which is interesting given I come from a consumer and commerce background. But I think there's a big shortage of developers. There's very high churn in developers. A lot of the work they do is highly inefficient because they spend a lot of time doing what they call plumbing, which is a lot of non-really value-adding job, but that needs to be done for the code to be released. And that is only getting worse. And going back to Sarah's point around moving to cloud and the apification of the economy, that's only making the whole dev environment much more complex, and that means they need either more talent and more productivity. So DevOps and dev tools is also a space where I've been focusing a lot.
Definitely, thank you. Actually, Hampus, in the interest of time, I wanted to ask you a little bit more specific question about climate. I mean, it seems now that there is a lot of investors, including Northzone, actually investing in the startups that are more related to climate and that are previously would be considered, I guess, niche topics. Do you see this difference now as we're coming out of the pandemic? Did something change over the last 2 years? Are people more receptive? Are there more companies?
I mean, I think that I would say like there are certain kind of climate companies that are so extremely climate. So like carbon measurements or something, which is that they essentially build on the fact that we have to kind of figure out how we're destroying the planet and sucking down carbon. And I think that's a very particular niche, I would say, of climate companies. I think there are many kind of climate companies that I think wouldn't be put in the top line what people think of what climate is, but when you think about it. So the way I think about it is that a lot of us just want businesses to kind of function long term on the planet, and we know that what we're doing now is not working. So most of businesses are kind of could be or are climate companies. So the way I look at it is the way we eat is not functional. Like what we eat and how we get food and everything doesn't work. It's like we're going to destroy the planet and not feed everybody. How we move goods short distances and people long distances is completely broken. That is just completely, it doesn't work. How we build and make stuff, both the materials and all the information about them, is completely broken. And then last part, which I think most people put in the absurd climate bucket, is kind of transparency. So knowing what happens in the value chain or knowing what's in a material or something. So I think for me, every single sector is a climate sector. And I think that most investors have woken up to that realization that you don't have to do carbon accounting to be climate. You can really look at anything that essentially how we do it today and just thinking how you do it with either zero footprint or actually in a positive way for the planet. So to answer your question, most investors have woken up. We have calls from every single downstream investor asking about our portfolio who have never touched climate before and probably never will invest in a climate startup.
And Carmen, I have a question for you because of something you mentioned. I mean, you mentioned why Europe. It made me laugh a little bit inside because we had a presentation when we were fundraising our fund of funds, literally titled "Why Europe?" Because it was a very common question, as you sure know, after fundraising, why would I invest in Europe and not in the US? How do you think this is changing? And maybe as a Spanish person, you could tell us a little bit more about the Spanish role in the ecosystem. And then Sarah, maybe you could contribute as well from Northzone's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, I think that if there is an exciting place right now, especially for very early stage, and I'm comparing to the US, comparing to Asia, it's actually Europe. I think Europe, there was the news like Europe has produced this year more unicorns than like China has. I think it is actually double the unicorns that it produced in like 5 years ago in 2016. And I think if you think about the next 5 years with the velocity that this all is taking and the amount of growth capital, there's all these companies, like Europe will be producing, let's be conservative, 2x the number of unicorns 5 years from now. All these companies are being created today in Europe, so like in London, but also in Germany, in Spain, and we see them. We have the privilege to see them. So I don't think there's been a more exciting time to be in European venture. And I think that as lame or sort of basic as it sounds, but the Americans coming to town is a good example, right? Like 2 weeks ago, Sequoia did an event for seed funds, and they brought in like all the like top US partners into it. Like they're really starting to, A16Z is doing a lot, like Benchmark Star, Lightspeed has opened enough. Like that is testimony that they see an opportunity, right? They wouldn't just hang out here. So I think there's never been a more exciting time.
And I mean, just to make a point, I mean,
Spain.
is that not, Spain, and is that not a question of valuation? It's to some degree as well, because it seems, I mean, we know that, for example, many funds started venturing to Central Eastern Europe, for example, to look for startups and developers there.
I think the thing with Spain, and I've been very sort of open, I think if you look at the ecosystem, it's probably like London, Berlin, Paris, and I'll let Sarah say what order that comes into. And then there is Spain. The thing with, when you look at the fundamentals and the regulation, the support, like the agility, like you can incorporate a company in the UK for zero. Yeah. In less than 24 hours. Like actually, like it's, and then actually there's this scheme called SEIS, and I won't get into tax like policies because that is very political, but which means that if I'm a high net worth individual and I have to pay HRMC, and let me simplify it, which is the UK tax authority, 100K in taxes that year, I can actually use this 100K taxes invested into companies, and whether I lose it or not, I get a big chunk deducted from HRMC, so they de-risk my investment because my choice is HRMC or the startup, so let's go for the startup, because if the startup does well and I hold it for 3 years, it's capital. You don't pay capital gains, right? And so all these things that are there to make sure that that very 0 to 500K, 0 to 700K fundraise of money, which is so difficult, is so much more agile there. There's so much more support. And then obviously there's the employment. So there are a lot of things that allow, at least the UK ecosystem, which is the one I know well, to move faster. Having said that though, I think talent in Spain is amazing. And like it is true, the level of education, but also creativity and like things that we have is very strong, and they're amazing entrepreneurs. And as new success stories, be it like Glovo, for example, like come in and more talent. Hopin is based in Barcelona now, like Typeform is. So as we create that, it's just like a bit behind in time, but I think that Spain will definitely be like a strong driving force, especially on the talent front, because everybody wants to live here.
I know we're running a bit over time, so Sarah, I don't know if you want to make
It's really hard to add on that, but I totally agree. I think historically, Spain has not produced the big outcomes above, maybe 100 million, but we've seen that in the likes of the Glovos, but also have newer companies like Typeform that are producing amazing talent and will probably go out and build really good businesses. So that's kind of like the wave we're at, but they're two good hubs, which I think is really unique as well. If you look into Madrid and Barcelona, great business schools in Spain, but also great technical talent, to Carmen's point, which are really good fundamentals for creating new companies. But it's still a lot harder than for other kind of like markets. I'm originally from Germany, and it's a pain to set up a business or to even fundraise and go through the legal process in Germany compared to like any like UK deal that we will be closing. And these are just small things that really,
they do make a difference.
They do make a difference for especially first-time founders. I think if you know how to run it, and I think then I think it's easier. But if you're a first-time founder, there are a lot of barriers in the ecosystem.
And I think this is an important point also for Spain. Hopin's round, which we both signed, 8.5 billion, signed over DocuSign. 500K angel deal in Spain or Germany, for the matter of fact. Sign a power of attorney, like get a NIF, take 8 weeks to do that. Actually, it costs you like 1K in pounds. If I invest in 25K and they charge me 1K for the lawyer, it just like makes absolute no sense. And I think that is something that we should look into.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Hampus, thank you very much for joining remotely.
Thanks.
I think that's it. Thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you.